That night, Megan woke to a faint scratching at the back shed. She grabbed a flashlight and froze. A full-grown bobcat was collapsed on the cold ground, breathing like his last breath was close. She helped him quietly, but by morning the fence line was stamped with coyote tracks. Then her camera caught a shadowy bobcat female standing just beyond the light, hesitating. And behind her, there wasn't only one more shape. That's when Megan realized she hadn't saved one animal. She'd stepped into the fate of an entire family being hunted. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The wind that night didn't just move through the pines outside Flagstaff. It worried them, like fingers tugging at every needle, every loose branch, every old memory of winter. Megan Carter sat up in bed with that familiar, unsettled feeling older folks know well. The house wasn't making its usual bedtime sounds. No steady hum from the vents, no friendly settling creaks. Just a thin, relentless whistle at the window seams and the faint rattle of something against the back wall, steady as a heartbeat. Then came the sound that snapped her fully awake. A soft scrape. Pause. Another scrape, slower this time, like whatever made it had to gather courage between each try. Megan slipped on wool socks, the kind that leave your feet warm but your toes still aware of the cold floor. Her robe felt heavy on her shoulders, comforting and practical. She reached for the flashlight in the nightstand, and as she did, her eyes flicked, almost by habit, toward the small home security camera monitor on her dresser. It showed the front porch in a washed-out gray, the yard beyond swallowed in darkness. Nothing at the front. But the back was always the back. She moved quietly down the hall, one hand braced on the wall. The air in the kitchen smelled faintly like yesterday's coffee, and the lemon cleaner she used on the counters, that clean, sharp scent that says, "This is my space." When she opened the back door, the cold hit her like a slap, dry and biting, with that high mineral smell snow carries even before it falls. The porch light cast a buttery amber circle across the steps, bright enough to show dust and pine needles, not bright enough to chase away fear. The scrape came again, not on the door this time, but from the side, near the storage shed where she kept extra towels, a toolkit, and a plastic bin labeled "Emergency." Her breath fogged in front of her face. She raised the flashlight, and the beam found the shape low to the ground. At first, her mind tried to make it something safe. A large stray cat, a raccoon, a sick dog. But the outline was wrong, too long in the legs, too heavy in the shoulders. And the face, when it lifted, had those unmistakable cheek ruffs and tufted ears. A bobcat. He was grown but barely holding together. His fur was darkened in places with mud and old moisture, clumped as if he'd slept in wet ground for days. One foreleg trembled when he tried to shift. His weight. His breathing wasn't a clean in and out. It caught, ragged, with a faint wheeze that made Megan's own chest tighten in sympathy. His eyes were open, but unfocused, like he was looking through the light instead of at it. Megan's first instinct was the one she'd learned the hard way from years of emergency cases at the animal clinic. Don't rush, don't corner, don't make the scared thing feel trapped. She kept her voice low, steady, the way you speak to someone who's hurt and ashamed of it. "Hey, easy," she murmured, and the words sounded small in the wind. "I see you." The bobcat didn't lunge, didn't snarl. He only blinked, slow, as if even that cost him something. Megan caught a whiff of him then, earthy, sour, and metallic, the scent of stress and old blood. A sharp ache opened behind her ribs. She knew that smell. It meant he'd been running on empty for too long. Her mind started doing the quiet math adults do when there's no one else to hand the problem to. Wild animal, legal considerations, safety. She pictured the number for the county wildlife line, the wait times, the possibility that help might mean a cage and a truck and a bad outcome. She pictured her own garage, warmer than outside, but still not a clinic. She thought about costs too, because everyone does, no matter how kind-hearted. Emergency veterinary care isn't cheap, and even with careful financial planning, surprises can rattle a budget. Her practical side flashed to homeowners insurance, the kind of thing you don't think about until you're standing in the cold with a wild predator on your property and wondering what damage, what liability, what deductible even means in a situation like this. But then the bobcat's head dipped, and his body sagged like a coat sliding off a hanger. A sound came from him, so faint it barely counted as sound, more like a tired breath surrendering. Megan felt the decision settle into her bones before she could argue with it. She stepped back into the kitchen for a thick blanket, the one that smelled like warm laundry and cedar from her closet. She grabbed a shallow bowl and poured in water with a pinch of electrolyte powder she kept for sick animals. When she returned, the porch light made the blanket look almost gold against the night, bright and hopeful in a world of black and gray. She knelt a careful distance away, knees stinging from the cold wood, and slid the bowl forward with slow hands. The bobcat's nose twitched. He leaned in, took a shaky sip, and for a second, Megan heard the quietest sound in the world. Water being swallowed by a creature that had almost run out of time. She didn't know it yet, but that single sip was the beginning of a story far bigger than one animal on one cold night. By the time Megan eased the garage door down, the wind outside sounded farther away, like it had been shut out on purpose. The garage wasn't warm the way a living room was warm, but it held a steadier kind of heat, dull, safe, smelling faintly of motor oil, cardboard, and the clean cotton of old towels stacked on a shelf. She clicked on the space heater she kept for winter mornings, and a soft orange glow began to bloom behind its grate. The bobcat stayed low, his body pressed to the blanket she'd spread on the concrete. The concrete itself was cold enough to bite through fabric, so Megan added another folded quilt underneath, thick and quilted, the kind that still held the faint scent of cedar and laundry soap. When she set it down, she felt the roughness of the concrete through her knees and the sting of cold rising up her shins. It reminded her in a very simple way that this wasn't a dream. This was real. She kept her movements slow and honest. No sudden reaches, no crowding, just her voice, steady as if she were talking to a nervous patient in the exam room. "You're safe in here," she whispered. "Just stay still for me." His eyes followed her, but not with fear the way most wild animals look at you. It was more like exhaustion had erased the sharp edges of his instincts. Every breath came with a faint rasp, like a dry leaf dragged across pavement. Megan could hear it even over the soft whir of the heater. She set the electrolyte bowl beside him again. He drank a little, then stopped, head dipping. The top of his shoulders rose and fell slowly. Megan watched for a long moment, counting those breaths the way people count a loved one's breathing in a hospital room, half prayer, half worry. When she finally got close enough to look him over, she saw the small details that told a bigger story. One ear was nicked at the edge, healed but jagged. Along his shoulder, the fur parted strangely in one spot, and beneath it the skin looked scabbed and puckered, the color of dried rust. There was also that smell again, metallic, faint, and old, like pennies warmed in a fist. And then her flashlight caught something that made her stomach tighten. A tag. It sat on the edge of his ear, dull and worn, not the bright plastic you'd see on livestock. This was smaller, weathered, the kind used for tracking, research, conservation work. The numbers were rubbed nearly smooth, but the shape of it was unmistakable. Megan felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief, because it meant someone had cared about him once, had taken the time to track him, maybe even treat him. Dread because it meant his life wasn't just his own anymore. It was a record, a file, a line in somebody's database. Her hands hovered for a second, not touching him, just close enough to feel the warmth that remained in his body. She could see the fine movement of his whiskers, the slight tremble in his jaw. His tongue slipped out once, dry as paper, then retreated. Megan backed away, pulled her phone from her pocket, and hesitated with her thumb over the screen. Outside, a branch knocked against the house with a hollow thunk. The sound made her heart jump, and for an instant she thought of the news stories you hear sometimes. Wildlife sightings, dangerous encounters, frightened neighbors. She also thought of something quieter, but just as real. How quickly life can get complicated when money and risk enter the room. A single emergency can turn into a stack of decisions about insurance coverage, payment plans, and whether you'll have to lean on credit you'd rather not use. She'd spent years telling people at the clinic, kindly but plainly, what treatment would cost. Now she was looking at that same kind of moment from the other side. Still, the Bobcat's breathing sounded worse. She dialed the one number she knew wouldn't treat this like gossip or a nuisance. Ethan Brooks picked up on the third ring. His voice was low, sleepy, the way a man sounds when he's been pulled from a hard-earned rest. Brooks. "Ethan, it's Megan Carter," she said softly, keeping her eyes on the animal. "I have a bobcat in my garage, adult male, hypothermic, dehydrated, wounded, and he's tagged." There was a pause on the line, not the kind where someone is thinking of what to say politely, the kind where a person has just swallowed something sharp. "A tag," Ethan repeated, careful. "You're sure?" "Yes," Megan said. "It's old. Numbers are worn down." Another pause. In the background, Megan heard the faint click of something. Maybe him turning on a lamp, maybe him standing up too fast. Then his voice came back, different now, awake, tight. "Don't post anything," he said. "Don't call neighbors. Don't let anyone come by." Megan's throat went dry. "Ethan, what's going on?" "I can't talk about it over the phone," he said, and the words came out like a warning. "Listen, keep him contained. Keep your distance. If he can drink, let him. If he can't, don't force it. I'm on my way. I'm on my way." A gust of wind hit the garage door, making it shudder in its frame. The bobcat flinched just a little, then stilled. Megan felt the hair rise on her arms under her robe, not fear of the animal in front of her, fear of what might have pushed him to her door. As she hung up, she realized something that made her chest feel heavy. This wasn't an accident. A bobcat doesn't drag himself to a human home unless the world behind him has become more dangerous than the world in front of him. Megan crouched again, keeping a respectful distance, and watched the slow rise and fall of his ribs. The heater hummed. The orange glow warmed the edges of his fur, turning the dark matted strands almost copper. In that small circle of light, he looked less like a threat and more like a survivor who had simply run out of road. "Okay," she breathed, more to herself than to him. "We're not done yet." Ethan arrived before sunrise, when the world still held that bluish, half-sleeping color, and the porch light looked like a lonely candle. Against the dark, his truck rolled up slow, tires crunching on gravel with a sound that felt too loud for the hour. When he stepped out, his breath came in white puffs, and the air smelled sharp, pine resin, cold dirt, and that faint promise of snow. Megan met him at the garage door, robe tied tight, hair pinned back the way she did for long clinic shifts. Her hands were steady, but her stomach wasn't. She'd spent the night in short bursts of sleep on the couch, waking every time the garage heater slicked or the wind hit the siding. Every time she woke, she listened for the bobcat's breathing, like it was a metronome holding time together. Ethan didn't waste words. He nodded once, the way a man does when he's already running through a checklist in his head. "Show me," he said. Inside, the garage light cast everything in a pale yellow wash: boxes, shelves, the old red toolbox. The heater's orange glow pulsed softly, and in that warm pocket of light, the bobcat lay curled, still but alive. His fur looked a shade darker than before, damp around the belly where melted frost had soaked in. When he lifted his head, it was slow, like his neck was heavy with sand. Ethan crouched, careful, and watched the animal's eyes. "He's not just tired," he murmured. "He's been pushed." Megan swallowed. "By what?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "We've had reports. Coyotes coming closer than usual, bold, hungry." He glanced at the ear tag without touching it, then looked up at Megan. "This tag, it means he's been on someone's radar. That's why I told you not to talk about it." Megan felt the cold settle behind her ribs. Why would that matter? Because people hear tagged and they think there's money, or a story or a problem they can blame on somebody, Ethan said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. And once neighbors start calling, the situation gets out of your hands fast. Megan knew what he meant. She'd seen it in town 100 times. A rumor starts, then someone posts, then suddenly strangers feel entitled to show up. And in the middle of all that noise, the living thing, this exhausted animal, becomes an object, a headline, a fight. Ethan straightened. "We need to know what's happening around your property." First thing, we check the fence line. Outside, daylight was just beginning to thin the darkness. The yard looked washed in gray-blue, the grass stiff with frost that sparkled like crushed glass. Megan's porch steps were cold enough that the wood seemed to pull warmth straight from her soles. Each breath tasted clean and metallic, the way winter air does when it's so cold it feels almost sharp on the tongue. They walked the perimeter in silence at first, listening. In the distance, a crow called once, harsh and lonely. Somewhere deeper in the trees, something small scurried through dry needles. Megan's senses felt turned up too high, every creak of branch, every whisper of wind. Then Ethan stopped and pointed. In the thin frost near the fence, there were tracks. Megan's eyes adjusted, and the pattern snapped into focus like a photograph developing. One set was unmistakable: rounded pads, clean lines, the confident spacing of a cat built for stalking. Bobcat tracks. But beside them, overlapping in places, circling in others, were sharper, more chaotic prints. Clawed, narrower, more aggressive. And there were a lot of them. Coyotes. Megan's throat tightened. The idea of Hank, she'd started thinking of him by that name in her head, moving through this yard with those shapes shadowing him, made her skin prickle. Ethan crouched and ran a gloved finger just beside the marks, not touching the frost, just measuring distance. "They were testing your fence," he said quietly, "not just passing through." Megan stared at the tracks until her eyes watered from the cold. "So, he came here because the lights, the noise, the smell of people," Ethan finished. "Predators avoid that until they're desperate." He looked toward the tree line, where the pines stood dark and dense, their shadows still thick even as morning grew. "If he made it to your door like this, there's a good chance he wasn't alone out there." Megan felt that shift inside her. The moment hope turns into something heavier. Saving one animal suddenly wasn't a neat, contained act of kindness. It was a doorway. It was a responsibility that might grow. Her mind flicked, uninvited, to practical fears. If coyotes were circling, if fences were being tested, what else might happen? What if there was property damage, a bite, an incident that triggered a call to her insurance company, the kind that sends your rates climbing? She hated thinking that way, but adulthood makes you think that way. It's not cold-hearted. It's survival with paperwork. Behind them, a faint sound came from the garage, soft, like a tired cough. Megan turned, heart lifting and dropping at once. Ethan followed her gaze. "He's waking up," Ethan said. They stepped back inside. Hank's head was raised now, eyes clearer, still wary but present. He stared past them, not at their faces, but toward the side window that looked out at the woods. His ears angled forward, his body tensed. Then, slowly, he looked back at Megan. It wasn't affection. It wasn't tame. It was something older and stranger, like a message without words, a warning or a request. Megan's skin went cold despite the heater's warmth, because in that moment she understood. Hank hadn't just come to be saved. He had come to lead someone back to what he'd left behind. By late afternoon, the light had turned honey-colored, the kind that makes even a plain garage look softer, as if the day itself is trying to be kind. The heater kept humming, steady as an old refrigerator, and the air carried that mixed smell of warm cloth, dust, and pine needles that had blown in on Megan's slippers. Outside, the wind eased, but it never truly stopped. It simply changed its voice, less angry, more watchful. Hank was sitting up now, not for long, and not comfortably, but enough that Megan could see the shape of his strength returning. His shoulders were broad under the ragged fur, and when he shifted, the muscles moved like coiled rope under skin. His eyes still held that tired film around the edges, yet the center of his gaze had sharpened. He was here. He was aware. Ethan stayed near the side door, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, giving Hank space the way you give a proud man dignity when he's down. "He'll push himself too fast," Ethan warned quietly. "They always do." Megan nodded. She'd seen it in dogs hit by cars, in barn cats brought in half-frozen. The body is weak, but the will is stubborn. She checked Hank's water, then replaced the bowl of bland food with something easier on a stressed stomach. As she leaned forward, she noticed the slight tremble in her own fingers. Not from fear of Hank, from the heavy awareness that outside that garage, the world was still dangerous, and she couldn't watch every corner at once. Hank's ears twitched, not at her, but at something beyond the walls. He turned his head toward the narrow window that faced the trees. For a long moment he stayed like that, listening. Megan listened too, straining until her temples ached. She could only hear the faint tick of the heater and, somewhere farther away, the soft rustle of pine boughs. But Hank heard more. He always did. Then he stood. It wasn't graceful. He rose like an old boxer getting up after the 10th round, slow and stubborn, hind legs shaking for a beat before they steadied. He took one step, then another, moving toward the corner where Megan kept her emergency bin and a stack of folded blankets. Megan's heart kicked in her chest. "Hank," she murmured, calm. "Easy." He didn't look at her. He moved with purpose, nose low to the floor, sniffing the air like he was reading a letter written in invisible ink. Then he stopped beside a small cardboard box that held rags and old garden gloves. He nudged it with his nose. The box slid an inch, scraping across the concrete with a dry, papery sound. Ethan lifted a hand, signaling Megan to stay back. "Let him," he whispered. Hank nudged again, harder. The box tipped, and something rolled out. Megan's flashlight beam caught it as it bounced once and came to rest near the blanket. A small branch. A piece of pine, maybe 6 inches long, snapped clean at one end, fresh enough that the inside wood still looked pale and damp. It hadn't been in that box yesterday. Megan knew because she was the kind of person who remembered what she owned and where she kept it. That was how she'd lived alone safely for years. Hank lowered his head and pushed the branch forward with a careful, deliberate motion until it sat just inside the line of the blanket, like he was placing it where Megan could see it. Megan felt a chill crawl up her arms that had nothing to do with the weather. It wasn't a toy. It wasn't food. It was a sign. Ethan's voice was almost too quiet to hear. He brought that in. Megan stared at the branch. The green needles on it were glossy, catching the light, and the smell hit her a second later. Sharp, clean pine, like the air after you snap a Christmas wreath stem. It was such a normal scent, so familiar, and yet in this moment it felt unnerving, like a message left on your doorstep with no name attached. "He's marking," Ethan said, thinking out loud. "Or showing you something." Hank finally looked at Megan, just once. His eyes were a deep amber brown, the color of black tea held up to sunlight. There was no softness there, no begging, only a steady insistence, as if he were saying, "You helped me." Now look. Megan's mind raced, trying to fit logic around instinct. In her world, signs were lab results, x-rays, numbers on paper. In Ethan's world, signs were tracks, wind direction, animal behavior. But here, in her garage, a wild cat had placed a pine branch like a marker stone. She glanced at Ethan. "What does it mean?" Ethan's jaw flexed. "It means he's thinking about the woods. It means he's not done. And it could mean..." He didn't finish. Outside, as if on cue, a sharp yip cut through the late-day air. Not close, but close enough. It echoed faintly, then another answered. Coyotes. Their voices carried a thin, hungry edge that made Megan's skin tighten across her shoulders. Hank's body tensed. His ears went up. A low vibration rolled in his chest. Not a full growl, but a warning sound, deep and controlled. Megan's mouth went dry. She thought of her yard, her fence, those clawed tracks circling. She thought of what the coyotes might be circling for. And she thought suddenly of something else too. The way Hank had looked toward the trees and then back to her, like he was weighing her against the dark. A cold truth settled in her mind with the weight of a stone. If Hank was leaving signs, he wasn't only trying to survive. He was trying to lead her attention towards something he couldn't protect alone anymore. Ethan pulled out his phone, thumb moving fast. "I'm setting cameras tonight," he said. "Infrared, quiet, no floodlights." Megan nodded, and in the same breath she felt the practical worries rise again like a tide. Security cameras weren't free. Neither were repairs if coyotes damaged fencing, and none of this came with a neat receipt, the way normal life did. She'd always believed in planning ahead, saving, budgeting, keeping her credit score clean, making sure her bills were paid on time. But life had a way of testing even good financial planning, and right now she could feel a costly storm gathering at the edge of her quiet routine. Hank lowered himself back down, but his eyes stayed on the window, and Megan understood that when night came, they wouldn't just be watching him. They'd be watching for who was watching him. That night, the kind of cold that makes your teeth feel too big settled over the neighborhood. The sky was clear, but it wasn't friendly, just a hard, dark bowl sprinkled with sharp stars. Megan stood on her back porch in a heavy coat, the fabric stiff at the elbows, her breath rolling out in pale clouds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The porch light painted the steps in a warm, buttery yellow, and beyond that circle, the yard dissolved into shadow. Ethan worked quietly along the fence line, moving like someone who'd spent his life trying not to startle the world. He mounted the first infrared camera low on a post, then another higher on a tree trunk, angled toward the far edge of Megan's property where the pine needles lay thick and black. Each time he tightened a strap, the plastic made a soft clicking sound that seemed too loud in the stillness. Megan kept glancing at the dark, feeling the strange pressure of being watched even when she couldn't see anyone. Inside the garage, Hank had been restless, rising and sitting again, his ears turning like small radar dishes. When Megan cracked the door to look in, she saw him standing near the window, his body a tense line, the muscles in his legs defined under fur that was slowly drying back into its natural pattern. His eyes tracked the yard as if he could see through walls. "He knows they're out there," Ethan murmured, stepping onto the porch. The cold air made his words sound brittle. "He's waiting for someone." Megan's throat tightened. "You think his mate?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked toward the trees, where darkness pressed against the fence like a tide. "If she's alive," he said finally, "she'll come close enough to check, but she won't trust you. Not yet." They went inside to warm their hands for a few minutes. Megan poured decaf coffee into 2 mugs, and the smell, rich and roasted, filled the kitchen, a comforting scent that reminded her of quiet mornings and newspaper pages. But her hands still felt cold around the ceramic. Her nerves were too awake. At 10:30, Ethan nodded toward the monitor he'd set on the table. A small screen, grainy black and white, showing Megan's yard through the eyes of the cameras. The fence line looked like a pale ribbon. The trees stood like dark pillars. Nothing moved. Midnight came and went. The house made small settling sounds, the kind you notice more when you're waiting for something. Megan's eyes started to burn with tiredness, and she rubbed them with the back of her hand, tasting the salt of dry skin on her lips. Then Hank made a sound from the garage. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a hiss. It was a low, rough call, short and urgent, like a single word spoken in a language Megan didn't know, but somehow understood. Ethan stiffened. Megan's heart thumped. On the monitor, one of the cameras caught movement at the far edge of the yard. A shadow, almost the same shade as the night, slipped between 2 trees. It paused, just outside the porch light's reach. Ethan leaned in, breath held. "There," he whispered. The figure stepped forward enough for the infrared to outline it clearly. A bobcat, sleek, cautious, shoulders low. Her ears were taller than Hank's, her frame narrower, built for speed and silence. She didn't look sick. She looked alert, alive, and terrified of making the wrong decision. Megan felt tears sting behind her eyes, not because she wanted to cry, but because relief can hit like pain when you've been bracing for the worst. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, tasting the faint bitterness of coffee on her skin. The bobcat, Luna, Megan thought, even though the name was only in her mind, stood perfectly still. Her head turned slightly, and even through the grainy screen, Megan could sense her scanning the yard the way a mother scans a room. Not for comfort, for threats. Then Hank called again from the garage, deeper this time. The sound vibrated in Megan's chest like a drumbeat. On the screen, Luna took 1 step closer, and behind her, the darkness shifted. Another shape appeared, then another. 2 smaller bobcats, not kittens, but young, big enough to hunt, still a little lanky in the legs. They hovered in the shadows, half hidden, eyes shining like tiny coins in the infrared glow. One of them pressed close to Luna's side. The other hung back as if ready to bolt. Megan's breath caught. "Oh my God!" Ethan's face tightened with a complicated kind of awe. "That's his family." The words landed heavy and warm at the same time. Megan felt it in her stomach, that sudden expansion of the story she'd thought she could manage. She hadn't saved 1 life. She'd reopened a door for many. On the monitor, Luna stayed at the edge of safety, watching the garage, watching the porch, watching everything. She was close enough that Megan could see the faint outline of her tail twitch once, a quick, nervous flick. Megan stood slowly and stepped toward the back window, careful not to make the floorboards creak. The glass felt icy against her forehead when she leaned close. Outside, she couldn't see them with her own eyes. The night swallowed them, but the camera showed them clearly, and that felt almost like cheating, like she was being allowed to witness something private. Then, in the far corner of the camera frame, a different motion flashed, fast and low near the fence. Ethan's hand lifted. "Hold on." 2 bright points appeared, then a third, then a fourth, eyes catching the infrared. Coyotes. They weren't inside the yard yet, but they were close enough that Megan's stomach dropped. Their bodies moved with that loose, hungry confidence, circling, testing, just like the tracks had promised. On the screen, Luna stiffened. Young bobcats froze. Hank's calls stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense silence that seemed to press down on the whole house. Megan could almost feel the cold outside, could almost hear the faint crunch of paws on frost, even though the sound didn't reach her ears. Ethan's voice was tight. "They're pushing in." For one long second, Luna stared toward the coyotes. Then she turned, nudged the younger ones sharply, and the 3 bobcats slipped backward into darkness as if they'd never been there at all. Megan's chest ached. The relief of seeing them was snatched away too fast, leaving only fear and a sharp, helpless wanting. She looked at Ethan, and her voice came out small. "They'll never come back," she said. Ethan stared at the screen, jaw clenched. "Not if they think this place is a trap," he said, "and not if the coyotes keep claiming the edge of it." Megan swallowed hard. Her mind jumped to practicalities again. Fence repairs, deterrence, cameras, the kind of unexpected home security upgrades. People end up financing when life changes overnight. She could almost hear the phrases, monthly payments, interest rates, home improvement loan. But none of that mattered as much as the truth on the screen. She had just seen a wild family on the edge of her light, and she had watched fear pull them back into the dark. Morning came in thin and colorless, like the sun was tired too. Frost clung to the grass. And the yard looked dusted in sugar, bright until you stepped on it and heard that dry little crunch under your boot. Megan stood at her kitchen sink with both hands wrapped around a mug, letting the warmth seep into her palms. The coffee tasted darker than usual, not because she brewed it differently, but because worry changes flavor. It makes everything sharper. Ethan had left before dawn to check another call, but he'd promised to return by noon. "Don't do anything dramatic," he'd warned. "No chasing, no feeding out in the open. We do this slow, or we lose them." Megan understood. Last night had shown her that Luna and the young ones were balancing on a knife edge. One wrong move, and they'd vanish into the trees for good. Hank, meanwhile, paced the garage like a man trapped in a waiting room, standing, sitting, turning his head toward the woods again and again. His eyes had that steady burn of purpose now, like the sickness was fading, but the urgency wasn't. Megan stepped onto the porch to take out the trash, and that's when she saw him. A man stood near the shared property line, just outside the fence, hands on his hips as if he owned the whole stretch of land. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, wearing a worn canvas jacket and a ball cap pulled low. The cold wind reddened the skin around his nose and cheeks. A dog waited at his side, stiff and alert. Megan recognized him from the "for sale" sign that had come down 2 weeks earlier. The new neighbor. He called out before she could decide whether to speak first. "Ma'am, hey, you the one who lives here alone?" The question hit her wrong, too personal, too quick. Megan kept her voice polite but firm, the way older women learn to do when they've had a lifetime of people testing boundaries. "Yes," she said. "Can I help you?" He walked closer, stopping at the fence like it was a counter in a store. Up close, Megan could see the lines around his eyes, the kind that come from sun and squinting. His gaze slid past her shoulder toward the back of the house like he was measuring something he couldn't see. "Name's Derek Shaw," he said. "I'm next door, and I'm going to be straight with you. There's talk. Folks heard something last night. coyotes, and someone said you've got a bobcat." Megan felt her stomach tighten. She forced herself to breathe slow. "Who said that?" Derek shrugged. "Small town, sounds travel. I run traps sometimes, legal ones, for nuisance animals. If there's predators hanging around, it becomes everyone's problem. My dog's not going to be somebody's snack." Megan's mind flashed to Luna's eyes on the camera, those coin-bright points watching the fence. She heard again the thin yips in the night. She kept her voice calm. "There's nothing for you to worry about," she said carefully. "A wildlife officer is handling it." Derek's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Wildlife officers handle paperwork. I handle results." The words were casual, but the meaning behind them was sharp. Megan's hands went cold around the trash bag. She tasted metal in the back of her throat, the taste that comes when fear turns into anger. "I'm asking you not to interfere," she said. "This is serious." Derek leaned in slightly, voice lowering. "What's serious is liability. You know how it goes. Something happens on your property, and people start calling insurance companies. Then the lawyers come sniffing around. Next thing you know, your premiums go up or they drop you. You got good homeowners insurance, ma'am? You got umbrella coverage? Because once there's wildlife incidents on record, it's a mess." Megan hated how he said it like a threat dressed up as advice. She'd always been careful, paid her bills, kept her credit clean, planned ahead the way adults do when nobody else is going to save them. She didn't need a stranger standing at her fence talking about coverage and consequences like he held them in his pocket. Before she could answer, the garage door rattled softly from inside. Hank had shifted. Derek's eyes snapped toward the sound. His dog stiffened, ears forward. "What was that?" Derek asked. Megan stepped sideways, blocking the view. "My garage. And it's none of your business." Derek's jaw tightened. "Look, I'm not trying to be the bad guy. But if that cat is drawing coyotes, you're making this worse. I've got a right to protect my property." Megan's voice stayed even, but her words came out colder. "And I have a right to handle what's on mine. Please leave." Derek held her gaze for a long beat, then lifted his hands in mock surrender. "Fine," he said, "but if I see coyotes near my fence line again, I'll do what I have to do." He turned away, boots crunching frost, and walked back toward his yard. Megan watched him go until he disappeared behind a stand of trees. Only then did she realize she'd been holding her breath. She went down the steps, heart pounding, and walked the inside edge of her fence line the way Ethan had shown her, slow, scanning the ground, letting her eyes catch what didn't belong. Near the corner where the shadows stayed thick even in daylight, she saw it. A metal shape half hidden under pine needles. Not big, not dramatic, but unmistakable in its purpose. A trap. Set close enough that any animal following the fence, coyote, bobcat, anything, could step into it. Megan's stomach dropped so fast she felt dizzy. She crouched, the cold seeping through her jeans, and stared at the dull steel jaws. The pine needles around it were pressed down as if someone had placed it carefully, then brushed the ground to hide the shine. Her fingers hovered above it, not touching. She could almost hear the snap in her mind, the sudden violence of it, the scream that would never come from Hank because wild animals don't beg. They endure. Megan stood, legs trembling, and looked back at her house. The porch light was off now, the day bright, ordinary. But her world no longer felt ordinary, because now the threat wasn't only in the woods, it had a human name. And if she didn't act with care, she wasn't just going to lose Hank. She was going to lose the whole family she'd glimpsed at the edge of her light. The storm arrived like a door being thrown open. One minute the sky was a dull pewter, heavy and quiet, and the next the wind hit hard enough to make the windows flex in their frames. Megan stood in her hallway listening to the house groan, those long, unfamiliar creaks that make you realize how thin wood and drywall really are. Somewhere outside, a loose branch slapped the siding with a wet, rhythmic smack, as if something kept trying to get in. Ethan pulled into her driveway just before dusk. His truck rocked slightly in the gusts. He stepped out with his jacket collar turned up, snow already clinging to the shoulders like flour. The air smelled raw, cold metal, damp earth, and the sharp bite of a storm that hadn't fully settled but promised it would. "I got your message," he said, voice raised over the wind. "The trap." Megan led him along the fence line, boots sinking into a thin layer of new snow that squeaked underfoot. She pointed to the spot where she'd found it. Ethan crouched, brushing away pine needles with gloved fingers. His face tightened, and the line between his brows deepened. "Illegal placement, this close to your boundary," he muttered. "At best, reckless. At worst—" He didn't finish. He carefully disabled it, folding it shut with practiced hands, then slipped it into a heavy bag. Megan's stomach twisted. "Can you make him stop?" "I can warn him," Ethan said. "I can document. Cameras help." He looked up at the sky, where the clouds rolled like dirty wool. "But tonight? Tonight we focus on keeping everyone alive." They hurried back as the first real snow began to fall, fat flakes that spun sideways in the wind and melted into cold drops on Megan's cheeks. The porch light came on, casting a warm circle that made the snow look almost pretty. But Megan knew better. Pretty storms still break things. Inside the garage, Hank paced like he could feel the pressure changing. His tail stayed low, his ears angled toward every noise. When a gust hit the door, the metal shuddered, and Hank froze, eyes locked on the window as if he expected teeth to appear in the glass. Megan had set up a sheltered spot along the back wall. 2 stacked wooden pallets, thick blankets, a tarp clipped above like a roof, creating a windbreak. A safe lane, Ethan called it. Not a home, not a cage, just a pocket of protection. She'd placed water and food farther back, away from the house, the way Ethan instructed, so the bobcats wouldn't start associating the porch with an easy meal. It was a delicate balance, enough to help them through danger, not enough to tame them into dependence. They'd barely finished reinforcing the tarp when the lights flickered, once, twice. Then the whole house went dark. The sudden silence after the heater shut off was startling. No hum, no steady vibration, just the storm's voice outside and the soft, anxious thump of Megan's heartbeat in her ears. The air felt colder instantly, as if the warmth had been holding its breath, and finally let go. Megan clicked on her flashlight. The beam cut a clean tunnel through the dim garage, turning floating dust into tiny silver sparks. Ethan's face looked sharper in that white light, older, more serious. "Power's out," Megan said unnecessarily, because saying it made it real. Ethan nodded. "We've got battery packs for the cameras. The monitor inside might go down, but the recordings should hold." Megan's mind jumped, as minds do in emergencies, to the practical list. How long the fridge would stay cold, whether pipes might freeze, whether she needed to call an electrician tomorrow if something shorted. She thought of all the things older people learned to prepare for. Extra blankets, a flashlight by every bed, a savings cushion for sudden repairs. A power outage could turn into a pricey problem fast. Burst pipes, damaged wiring, emergency home repair bills. The kind of thing people end up paying for with a home equity line of credit when life gets rough. She hated that her brain went there, but her brain had lived long enough to know how quickly a storm becomes a statement. Outside, the wind screamed through the trees and something cracked in the distance, wood splitting under pressure. Megan flinched. Hank's body went rigid. Then came the sound that chilled her more than the blackout. A yip, close. Then another. Then three voices overlapping, thin and sharp, like knives tapping glass. Coyotes. Ethan's eyes snapped toward the window. He moved to the side door and peered out, keeping his body behind the frame. Megan followed, heart hammering. The porch light was dead now, leaving the yard drenched in darkness. But the snow itself reflected faint starlight, turning the ground into a pale sheet. Shadows moved at the far edge of the fence, low shapes weaving, circling. "They're using the storm," Ethan whispered. "Noise covers them." Hank let out a low, warning rumble, deep enough that Megan felt it in her bones. Not panic, resolve. He stepped toward the sheltered area, then turned, ears forward, as if waiting for something beyond the fence. And then Megan saw it. A shape slid into view near the back corner of the yard, just where the trees thickened. Luna! Her coat looked darker in the night, and snow dusted her back like salt. Two younger bobcats moved behind her, close enough that their sides brushed. They weren't coming to visit. They were coming because the storm had pushed them to the last safe edge. Megan's throat tightened so hard she could barely swallow. She raised the flashlight slightly, then stopped, remembering Ethan's warning. No sudden light that could feel like an attack. She angled the beam downward instead, letting the spill of glow mark the shelter without pointing at their faces. Luna watched, frozen. Her eyes caught the faint light and flashed once, bright and wary. The younger ones pressed closer to her, tails low. And at the fence line, beyond them, coyotes moved like smoke. Ethan's voice was barely audible. "If they bolt now, the coyotes will chase." Megan felt her whole body turn cold with helplessness. She couldn't run out there. She couldn't scoop them up. She couldn't fight a storm, coyotes, and fear all at once. All she could do was hold that narrow strip of safety steady, like a lantern in a gale. A gust tore at the tarp. The clips snapped once with a sharp pop, and the roof flapped wildly. The sound made Luna tense, ready to flee. Megan moved without thinking. She stepped into the garage doorway, wind biting her face, snow stinging her cheeks, and held the tarp down with both hands. The fabric was icy and slick. Her fingers ached instantly, numb and burning at the same time. She could taste the storm, cold water and air so sharp it felt like breathing glass. "Easy," she whispered, not sure who she was speaking to. Luna? Hank, herself. "Just easy." Ethan braced the other side, tying the tarp down tighter. The shelter steadied. The flapping stopped. The night's chaos softened by one small degree. And in that tiny pause, Luna made a decision. She stepped forward into the edge of the sheltered space, just far enough that the snow no longer landed on her back. The two younger bobcats followed, quick and silent, pressing in behind her. Hank moved to the front of the shelter like a guard posted at a door, shoulders squared, eyes locked toward the fence. Megan's chest tightened with something close to awe. They weren't pets. They weren't hers. But in the darkest, coldest moment, when the power was gone and danger was close, a wild family had chosen the safety she'd built with her own hands. And outside the fence, the coyotes kept circling, as if furious that the light, however small, had not gone out completely. By morning, the storm had spent itself. The wind quieted into a tired sigh, and the world outside looked freshly scrubbed, white and bright, as if nothing terrifying had happened. Snow clung to the pine branches in thick pillows, and when the sun finally broke through, the yard glittered like someone had scattered salt and diamonds across it. Megan stepped onto the porch and felt the cold bite her lungs, but there was something different in it now, less panic, more relief. The power came back with a soft click and a long, steady hum as the heater restarted. That ordinary sound made Megan's eyes sting. You don't realize how much comfort lives in a simple hum until it disappears. In the garage, the shelter still stood. The tarp was tight, the blankets damp at the edges but holding warmth. Hank sat at the front like a sentinel, his body a dark, steady shape against the pale snow beyond. Luna was tucked farther back, head up, eyes sharp. The two younger bobcats were pressed close together, breathing slow, their fur fluffed thick against the cold, looking like living shadows with frost dusting their backs. Megan didn't step closer. She just stood at the doorway and let them see her, calm and still, the way you show respect to something that could leave at any moment. The air smelled like wet wool and pine sap and the faint sweetness of snow melting on wood. Every now and then, a drop slid from the tarp and landed with a soft plink on the concrete. Ethan arrived mid-morning with his clipboard, camera footage, and that purposeful stride that said he'd been working since before dawn. He checked the fence line first. Snow had softened the ground, and fresh tracks told the story clearly. Coyotes had come close, then circled away when they realized the yard wasn't an easy win anymore. "They'll try again," Ethan said, voice low, "but we can make it harder." He and Megan worked all day in the pale winter sun. They reinforced the fence where the wind had loosened it, added motion-activated lights along the outer line, and placed legal, humane deterrents, sound and scent that told coyotes this wasn't their hunting ground. Ethan mounted 2 more cameras higher up, angled wide. Their tiny red sensors blinked like watchful eyes. Megan's hands grew sore, knuckles raw from cold metal and tightening screws. She could feel every joint in her fingers. But there was a strange steadiness in the work, the kind you feel when you're doing something that matters, even if nobody claps for it. At one point, Megan caught herself thinking about the expense. Fence repairs, extra cameras, equipment, none of it was cheap. It was the kind of surprise that makes people look at their savings account and swallow hard, or consider a home improvement loan, or recheck their monthly budget and wonder what can be cut. But then she'd glance toward the shelter, and the cost stopped being a number and became a choice. Sometimes the most valuable things in life don't come with a neat price tag. They come with sacrifice and sore hands and a quiet, stubborn heart. Late afternoon, Ethan sat at Megan's kitchen table with a magnifying glass and a small reference book. He'd taken a close-up photo of Hank's ear tag. Under bright light, with the grainy edges sharpened, faint numbers emerged. Ethan exhaled slowly. "I knew it," he said. Megan's stomach tightened. "What?" "This isn't random," Ethan said. "Hank, well, that's what you've been calling him. He was part of a conservation tracking program a few years back. Adult male, strong territory holder, the kind that keeps other predators from pushing into an area. If he got sick or injured, the whole balance shifts." Megan stared at him. "So when he showed up here..." Ethan nodded. "He didn't just stumble in. He came toward light, toward noise, toward the one place coyotes hesitate to press too hard. He found you because you're a boundary they don't understand." The words sent a shiver through Megan, not because she felt powerful, but because she realized how thin the line was between her quiet life and the wildlife just beyond her fence, how easily the woods could lean into her world when nature got desperate. That evening, as the sun sank and the snow turned pink and lavender in the fading light, Derek Shaw appeared again at the fence. This time, Ethan stepped out to meet him, camera footage and documentation in hand. Megan stayed behind, close enough to hear, but far enough to let Ethan handle it. Derek's voice carried on the cold air. "I'm telling you, I've got a right." Ethan cut him off with calm authority. "You have a right to protect your property legally. You do not have a right to set traps that can injure protected wildlife or enter someone else's boundary zone. I've documented what I found. I'm also documenting the coyotes. If you keep this up, you'll be the one with a problem." There was a long pause. Megan could almost hear Derek's pride grinding against reality. Finally, he muttered something under his breath and walked away. No apology, no kindness, but he walked away. And that, Megan realized, was sometimes victory. Not a hug, not a thank you, just a threat removed. The days that followed settled into a cautious rhythm. Hank grew stronger, his coat drying into a rich mix of tawny brown and charcoal spots. He began spending more time near the open garage doorway, watching the yard, watching the trees. Luna appeared more often at dusk, always careful, always scanning. The two younger bobcats started to play, small bursts of motion in the snow, pouncing, rolling, then freezing instantly at the slightest sound. Wild joy, measured and quick. Megan learned the language of stillness. She learned how to step outside without making herself a threat, how to breathe softly, how to simply exist in their presence without demanding anything from them. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the space between them changed, not into ownership, not into a pet relationship, into something older, coexistence. One morning, Megan opened the back door to find something placed neatly at the edge of the shelter. Not food, not trash. A single feather, pale and clean, laid beside a small pine sprig. A quiet offering. A marker. A message. Megan stood there with the cold air on her face and felt her throat tighten. She didn't reach for it right away. She just looked at it, letting the meaning settle gently, like snow falling without wind. Behind her, the house was warm. Ahead of her, the woods were still wild. And right there in between, a bobcat family had chosen to live near her light, close enough to survive, far enough to stay free. She had saved one dying bobcat. And now, by some mysterious, hard-won trust, his whole family lived with her, on the edge of her yard, in the shelter she'd built, under the quiet protection of the world she kept steady. Not because she captured them, because she didn't. They stayed because she gave them the rarest thing a wild creature can find near humans, safety without a trap. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.